User groups really are just meant to provide a secondary layer of permissions to one or more users and group them so that you don't have to provide multiple layers of individual permissions. That can be a bit tedious. And in this lab, that's exactly what we'll demonstrate. We're going to create one group and a couple different users that share that group but have different individual permissions. But by the fact that they're part of this other group, they can both access something else and not have to worry about any conflicting individual permissions as a result. So to get started, we're going to need to use the add group command, and it will require sudo permissions just like any type of user administration. But first we'll need a couple users to put inside that group. So let's go ahead and add another user, and let's bring Bilbo into the equation. So I think you can see where I'm going to be going with a certain group that I'll need to add them into. So next we're going to also add in Gandalf, and choose any passwords that you would like. Again, it's just to remember, so keep it simple. This is more for concept. Don't need to provide any additional full name and all that. So now we should have two more users on this system. We should have Bilbo, and we should have Gandalf. And in order to add them to a group, we're going to need to use a new command called usermod. And basically, this just modifies the user account. And let's look inside the man page to see what we need to do. So the documentation just says to use tac-a for append and add the user to supplementary groups, but use only with the tac-G option. So the tac-G, located in the bottom of the man page over here, is just to specify the group names themselves. So a list of supplementary groups, which the user is also a member of. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so the only thing missing at this point is a group name. And Bilbo never got to be part of the fellowship, so let's go ahead and let's make a fellowship group so we can put him inside of it. And it's going to let us know that it's being created and now it's done. And it's actually given us a new group ID of 1003. So now we can use this sudo usermod command with a tac-a and G, and we can combine that into one entire flag, just like ls tac-al. And then we just need to specify fellowship as the group and then the user account name. Then one more time for Gandalf himself. Okay, good. So now what we can do, just to verify that our steps worked, is we can run the groups command against a username, and it'll let us know what groups that user pertains to. So groups Bilbo and groups Gandalf, it should show just their username and then their normal group name that gets generated on user creation, and then fellowship. Okay, looking good. Now let's actually clear the screen and look at where some of this user information lives as lists. And there's a file under etc called password, or passwd. And if we cat that file, it's readable by everyone. We can actually see a list of all the user accounts on the system, their user IDs, and their home folder, and their shell as well too, the bin bash shell in this case. And now the etc password file is actually pretty bloated. There's a lot of information in there. So if we wanted just to search inside that file, we can use a new tool called grep. And we haven't used that yet before, but the convention's pretty straightforward. We'll dive more into finding and searching in the next lab, so this will be a light intro to that. And grep searches for a pattern inside of a file or a given amount of output. So if we did grep Ubuntu in etc password, notice the output here. If grep is successful in finding a match, it'll highlight what you search for, in this case, Ubuntu. It'll highlight that in red. And this is a really fast way to validate that something exists inside of a file. So let's go ahead and do that one more time now, but also search for Bilbo. And perfect. So this validates that Bilbo does exist inside that file. And we can do that one last time as Gandalf. And really, that's grepping. It gets a little bit more complicated later, but if we want to do a quick search inside of a file and seeing if a pattern of text matches somewhere in that file, we can easily do that. And let's just do that one more time now, but with the pattern of root as the string of text that we're looking for. And notice that the output, that when we run it, it actually will provide us multiple lines. So if our pattern we're looking for exists in multiple lines, it'll give us all those lines, which is actually pretty cool. Okay, great. So let's actually look at another user list file. and that's called the etc shadow file. And note that it is actually permission dependent. So we have to do this with sudo if we'd like to look inside that file. And the etc shadow file is a little bit different than etc password. It'll still contain the usernames inside of it, but what it does a little bit differently is that it actually provides the hashed passwords of that user account. And this is a really important file that only root should have access to, truthfully, because we have hashed user passwords inside here. That's stored credentials. We don't want that exposed to anyone other than a system administrator. And then there's one last user list file that we want to take a look at, which is actually more of a group list file. It's called etc group. And inside of this file, we can get a listing of all groups on the system and then which users are part of those groups. So let's cat that group out and then take a look and see the formatting for it. And we can see in the bottom that we have fellowship and we can see Bilbo and Gandalf inside, but probably easier just to do a quick grep. So let's grep fellowship through the etc group file, and that's a lot easier to read. So we don't have to run a group command against each username. We can just do a grep fellowship and look within inside the etc group file. All right, so the stage is set. Let's get two shells, one logged in as Bilbo and then one logged in as Gandalf. So we can do su Bilbo and su Gandalf and split terminals on one side of the screen each. Perfect. Okay, so let's actually cd into the home directory from Bilbo's terminal. And what we want to do here now is we want to create a file, and we're going to put some text inside of it. And we want to make that file then accessible to the fellowship group, but owned and created by Bilbo. I think the secret phrase of melon inside of speak friend and enter should be a pretty good file here as a file shared by the fellowship group. So we need to chmod it as 770. That gives full permissions to the owner and the group, and then everyone else shouldn't be able to access that file as a result. Perfect. Looking at the permissions, we should see full permissions, user, owner, but then everyone else is zeroed out. Now, what we need to do is change the second column there to provide access to the fellowship group. And of course, there's another command to do that. It's kind of similar to chmod. It's actually chown or chown or chone. It depends how people want to say it. And this changes just the ownership of the file. Using the syntax is pretty straightforward, as we can see inside of the man page, just chown, and then any options that we would like to set. And then it's just owner, group, and then file. So in this case, if we want to change the speak friend and enter secret file, we want to go ahead and just write in chown, and then set the permissions to be Bilbo, and then speak friend and enter is the file name. So let's go and do that. And now if we run an ls-tac-al and speak friend enter, perfect. We can see here by highlighting them, the first column, Bilbo, that's the owner. Second column, group of fellowship. So now anyone in the fellowship group should be able to access this file. Let's move over to the right terminal now as Gandalf. And just double check. If we run groups, yes, we see Gandalf and fellowship as group access for Gandalf. So Gandalf now, if we cd inside of home Bilbo, where this secret file lives, we should be able to just cat it, and it works perfect. So we can see it. We can see the contents of the file, and that's how group permissions work. Awesome. So it's not that complicated, right? Now let's just do for good measure. Let's actually exit, and now we're back as Ubuntu. Let's cd inside of the home folder for Bilbo, and let's try to cat the file, and we should, yes, we get permission denied. Perfect. Everything's working as expected. And of course, all now that's left is just a little bit of cleanup. So let's exit these terminals and delete all of the contents and groups that we created in this process, just for good practice. The only thing that will be different this time is that we have a new command of del group, kind of similar to del user. So we'll go inside of here and we'll go and remove the file that we created. We'll also run some sudo commands and del group and del user, all of our group and users that we created. Awesome. Okay, so we covered a lot of ground so far with all these labs. Up to date now, we've generally covered the basics of administration on the command line, but what we haven't covered is utility. And this is when things start to get a little bit exciting. We start to be able to use our terminal to perform functions and complete tasks and make our life easier. And we'll do that from here on out.